Going to pulled up observations and inferences. Okay, so hopefully you guys have had an opportunity to watch the video a couple times. And based on our key terms, we should know that an observation is something that is based on the use of our senses, whether it's something that we see, something that we hear, touch, taste, or even smell. And an inference is a conclusion that is drawn from reasoning and evidence. So you guys have had an opportunity to work on this student sheet on your own. Okay, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to go through this. You guys are going to follow along. I'm going to identify each of the following statements as either an observation or an inference that was made about pellagra. And if you need to make any revisions or corrections, please do so. That's why we're doing this. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. First statement: corn causes pellagra. Would that be considered an observation? Is that something that Dr. Goldberger was directly able to observe? Not necessarily. Okay. Now, is that something that he was able to conclude based on reasoning and evidence? I would say yes, because he knew that corn was a major staple of their diet, especially in the rural South. Okay, so even though it's not necessarily correct, it is something he was able to infer based on reasoning and evidence. So we're going to go ahead and mark that as an inference. Okay. Statement 2. Only children in the orphanage developed pellagra. The staff did not. So remember, okay, Dr. Goldberger was able to go into those orphanages and make observations directly from what he saw. So was he physically able to see that in those orphanages, yes, there were some of the children that would develop pellagra, but he also noticed that the staff did not. So that is something that he was able to directly see. So that would be considered an observation. Okay. Third statement: changing the orphans' diet cured those who had pellagra. Now remember, that was part of one of the clinical trials that he conducted. He decided to make some changes. Let's switch up the orphans' diet and let's see what happens. Remember, because their diet consisted mainly of pork, syrup, cornbread, things of those nature, not very high on nutritional value. Okay, so he started to feed them, milk, fruits, vegetables, lean meat, things of that nature, more well-balanced meals. Okay, and he noticed a change for the positive, where these orphans started to get better and become cured of pellagra. So was that something that he was able to directly observe, or was it something that he was able to infer based on evidence and reasoning? Well, that would be considered an observation because it is something that he was able to directly see right there, okay, conducting his clinical trial. So that would be considered an observation. All right. Fourth statement: only people who lived in the South got pellagra. Observation or inference? Was that something that was, he was able to notice based on the use of his senses, or was that something he was able to conclude based on reasoning and evidence? Okay, it doesn't have to be correct, but this is something that he was able to observe, because where was he at? He was in the South when he was conducting this study. So that lets you know right there that this is an observation. About halfway done. Stay with me. Keep following along. Fifth statement: pellagra is not an infectious disease. Is that something that he was able to observe directly, or is that something that he was able to infer based on reasoning and evidence? Well, he was able to observe in these orphanages and prisons that, the orphans and prisoners would develop pellagra, but the staff would not. So that's something that he was able to observe directly. Now, based on that evidence, he was able to conclude that pellagra is not an infectious disease. So that would actually be considered an inference. Okay, sixth statement. Pellagra causes skin rashes and eventually insanity. Now, based on his clinical trial and the groups of people that he was able to study, those are one of the effects that he was able to notice. He was able to see, so that would be considered an observation. Statement number 7, people get pellagra because they are poor. Now, he was in the rural South, okay? And this is early 1900s, all right? So is this something that he was able to observe or infer? So he was studying prisoners, orphans, people in the rural South. He was able to see and observe that they weren't that wealthy. So based on that evidence, he was able to infer that people get pellagra because they are poor. Because of all the people that he was studying in these clinical trials and conducting these observations, there weren't many of them that were considered to be wealthy at that time. So this would be considered an inference. Pellagra is caused by diet. Okay, so from his 2 clinical trials, he conducted a study in the orphanage and he conducted a study in the prisons. Okay, and one of the main things that he did when conducting this clinical trial and these studies is that he decided to switch up the diet. And when he switched up the diet, these patients started to, they were cured, they got better. So he observed that changing the diet was able to help these orphans and these prisoners. So based on that evidence, he was able to infer that pellagra is caused by diet. So this would be considered an inference. Nope. Excuse me. Give you guys a second to get caught up real quick, and then we'll continue with the last 2 statements and finish up. All right, statement number 9. Orphans and prisoners who ate a balanced diet did not develop pellagra. This is something that Dr. Goldberger was able to see directly because this was part of his clinical trial, his clinical study. Okay, he saw that switching up the diet helped these orphans and prisoners, become cured from pellagra. So he saw this directly, so that would be an observation. Last statement. So the Southern way of life caused pellagra. Okay, observation or inference. Is this something that was able to be seen directly? Okay, or is this something that was able to be based on evidence and reasoning? Well, considering all the facts and the information that was gathered, this is something that they were able to infer based on evidence and reasoning. They were in the South, the rural South. Okay, they were, the diet was considered to be very southern way of life and the way they lived. So, not a whole lot of wealthy people. So this is something based on evidence and reasoning that would be considered an inference. Okay, so now we're going to move on to statement 1 down here and see what this has to say. It says, look at the statements that you marked as inferences based on the evidence that Dr. Goldberger found. Put a star next to each inference that is considered faulty or false, not true. Okay, so we have 5 inferences right here. 5 statements to be considered inferences. And we need to figure out which of these 5 is considered to be false, and there could be more than one. So first one, corn causes pellagra. Was it necessarily that corn caused pellagra? Not entirely. Okay, it wasn't just corn, it was just the overall lack of nutrition that they had in their diet. So this would be considered faulty. So I'll just put a circle next to it, or a dot. Okay. Next one. Pellagra is not an infectious disease. Well, we know that that is true because of the 2 clinical trials that were conducted. We know that staff didn't develop pellagra, but the orphans and prisoners did. So we know that that one is true. Move on to the next one. People get pellagra because they are poor. Well, they just thought that because that was a majority of the people that they were dealing with. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily true, so this one would also be considered false. Okay, moving on. Pellagra is caused by diet. Well, I think that this would be considered true because we saw what happened when, the orphans and prisoners, their diet was switched up, and they started eating more nutritional meals, that they were cured from pellagra. So we would say that pellagra is caused by diet. We would say that that is true. And the last one, the Southern way of life caused pellagra. I wouldn't say that this is entirely accurate, okay, because, yeah, they were in the South. Yeah, their diet was considered to be Southern and just their way of life in general, okay? But he wasn't called to the North or the Midwest or the West Coast or any of that. So this could have been a problem in other places, but he was just in the Southern United States. So this would be false as well, okay? So the 3 statements that I have dots next to, those would be considered faulty or false. Now you would move on to number 2 and you would choose one of the inferences that you put a star or dot next to and explain how that inference could have been made based on observations. Again, make sure that you followed along. Hopefully you've made any corrections that are necessary. Okay, you can go back and watch this as many times as you need to help you out. But, hope that this helped in gaining some understanding, and talk to you guys soon. Bye.